All right, welcome back. This is Rule 3 from 12 Rules of Life. Now, this chapter is fairly simple. It's mainly just a personal story about Dr. Jordan Peterson, where he grew up, how his life was growing up in a small town, and how the social dynamics within that town influenced the decisions that he made and the decisions that some of the people that he was close with made as well. And then he uses that as a basis then to describe some of the stuff that he talks about later in the chapter. So what I'm going to do is just read the couple of pages where there's actually some context, there's actually some material to discuss here that can be beneficial. So starting off, he says, but Christ himself, you might object, befriended tax collectors and prostitutes. How dare I cast aspersions on the motives of those who are trying to help? But Christ was the archetypal perfect man, and you're you. How do you know that your attempts to pull someone up won't instead bring them, or you, further down? Imagine the case of someone supervising an exceptional team of workers, all of them striving towards a collectively held goal. Imagine them hardworking, brilliant, creative, and unified. But the person supervising is also responsible for someone troubled, who is performing poorly elsewhere. In a fit of inspiration, the well-meaning manager moves the problematic person into the midst of his stellar team, hoping to improve him by example. What happens? And the psychological literature is clear on this point. Does the errant interloper immediately straighten up and fly right? No. Instead, the entire team degenerates. The newcomer remains cynical, arrogant, and neurotic. He complains. He shirks. He misses important meetings. His low-quality work causes delays and must be redone by others. He still gets paid, however, just like his teammates. The hard workers who surround him start to feel betrayed. Why am I breaking myself into pieces, striving to finish this project? Each thinks, when my new team member never breaks a sweat. The same thing happens when well-meaning counselors place a delinquent teen among comparatively civilized peers. The delinquency spreads, not the stability. Down is a lot easier than up. Maybe you are saving someone because you're a strong, generous, well-put-together person who wants to do the right thing. But it's also possible, and perhaps more likely, that you just want to draw attention to your inexhaustible reserves of compassion and goodwill. Or maybe you're saving someone because you want to convince yourself that the strength of your character is more than just a side effect of your luck and birthplace. Or maybe it's because it's easier to look virtuous when standing alongside someone utterly irresponsible. Assume first that you are doing the easiest thing and not the most difficult. Your raging alcoholism makes my binge drinking appear trivial. My long, serious talks with you about your badly failing marriage convince both of us that you are doing everything possible and that I am helping you to my utmost. It looks like effort. It looks like progress. But real improvement would require far more from both of you. Are you so sure the person crying out to be saved has not decided 1,000 times to accept his lot of pointless and worsening suffering simply because it is easier than shouldering any true responsibility? Are you enabling a delusion? It is possible that your contempt would be more salutary than your pity. Or maybe you have no plan, genuine or otherwise, to rescue anybody. You're associating with people who are bad for you not because it's better for anyone, but because it's easier. You know it. Your friends know it. You're all bound by an implicit contract, one aimed at nihilism and failure and suffering, one of the stupidest sort. You've all decided to sacrifice the future to the present. You don't talk about it. You don't all get together and say, let's take the easier path. Let's indulge in whatever the moment might bring. And let's agree, further, not to call each other on it. That way, we can more easily forget what we are doing. You don't mention any of that. But you all know what's really going on. Before you help someone, you should find out why that person is in trouble. You shouldn't merely assume that he or she is a noble victim of unjust circumstances and exploitation. It's the most unlikely explanation, not the most probable. In my experience, clinical and otherwise, it's just never been that simple. Besides, if you buy the story that everything terrible just happened on its own, with no personal responsibility on the part of the victim, you deny that person all agency in the past and, by implication, in the present and future as well. In this manner, you strip him or her of all power. It is far more likely that a given individual has just decided to reject the path upward because of its difficulty. Perhaps that should even be your default assumption when faced with such a situation. That's too harsh, you think. You might be right. Maybe that's a step too far. But consider this: failure is easy to understand. No explanation for existence is required. In the same manner, fear, hatred, addiction, promiscuity, betrayal, and deception require no explanation. It's not the existence of vice or the indulgence in it that requires explanation. Vice is easy. Failure is easy too. It's easier not to shoulder a burden. It's easier not to think, and not to do, and not to care. It's easier to put off until tomorrow what needs to be done today, and drown the upcoming months and years in today's cheap pleasures. As the infamous father of the Simpson clan puts it, immediately prior to downwarding a jar of mayonnaise and vodka, that's a problem for future Homer. Man, I don't envy that guy. How do I know that your suffering is not the demand of martyrdom for my resources, so that you can have, oh so momentarily, stave off the inevitable? Maybe you have even moved beyond caring about the impending collapse, but don't yet want to admit it. Maybe my help won't rectify anything, can't rectify anything, but it does keep that too terrible, too personal realization temporarily at bay. Maybe your misery is demand placed on me so that the gap you so painfully feel between us can be reduced, while you degenerate and sink. How do I know that you would refuse to play such a game? How do I know that I am not myself merely pretending to be responsible while pointlessly helping you so that I don't have to do anything truly difficult and genuinely possible? Maybe your misery is the weapon you brandish in your hatred for those who rose upward while you waited and sank. Maybe your misery is your attempt to prove the world's injustice instead of the evidence of your own sin, your own missing of the mark, your conscious refusal to strive and to live. Maybe your willingness to suffer in failure is inexhaustible, given what you use that suffering to prove. Maybe it's your revenge on being. How exactly should I befriend you when you're in such a place? How exactly could I? Success, that's the mystery. Virtue, that's what's inexplicable. To fail, you merely have to cultivate a few bad habits. You just have to bide your time. And once someone has spent enough time cultivating bad habits and biding their time, they are much diminished. Much of what they could have been has dissipated, and much of the less that they have become is now real. Things fall apart of their own accord, but the sins of men speed their degeneration, and then comes the flood. I am not saying that there is no hope of redemption, but it is much harder to extract someone from a chasm than to lift him from a ditch. And some chasms are very deep, and there's not much left of the body at the bottom. Maybe I should at least wait to help you until it's clear that you want to be helped. Carl Rogers, the famous humanistic psychologist, believed it was impossible to start a therapeutic relationship if the person seeking help did not want to improve. Rogers believed it was impossible to convince someone to change for the better. The desire to improve was, instead, the precondition for progress. I've had court mandated psychotherapy clients. They did not want my help. They were forced to seek it. It did not work. It was a travesty. If I stay in an unhealthy relationship with you, perhaps it's because I'm too weak willed and indecisive to leave. But I don't want to know it. Thus, I continue helping you and console myself with pointless martyrdom. Maybe I can then conclude about myself: someone that's self sacrificing, that willing to help someone that has to be a good person. Not so. It might just be a person trying to look good, pretending to solve what appears to be a difficult problem instead of actually being good and addressing something real. Maybe instead of continuing our friendship, I should just go off somewhere, get my act together, and lead by example. And none of this is a justification for abandoning those in real need to pursue your narrow, blind ambition, in case it has to be said. All right, so that's all that I'm gonna read from this chapter. The summary of that really is just about working on yourself first, especially when you're younger, because you're just full of life, so much possibility and potential for the future that you can really mess that progress up hanging out with people And as good as it sounds to be open to everybody, you should, to a degree, to a degree. And you might, I know how it sounds. You might sound a little standoffish. You might feel kind of like a bad person, but some people, you got to use your judgment, are just not gonna, be able to be saved. So, you think about a homeless person. Maybe out of the goodwill of your heart, you want to help that homeless person. Okay, so maybe you pick that homeless person up, and you're one of the people on the YouTube videos, and you go and you get them a haircut, and you get them a meal, and you do all that, and that's fine. But to continuously hang out with those people will be bad. It will be bad. Unless that's your life work, it will be bad, because it's complicated how people can influence you. And you might think that if you're the better person over time, you're going to influence the toxic person. But as the psychologist Carl Rogers has said in all of the studies, the toxic person will not change unless ready, and they will shame and judge and try and guilt the good person out of good nature, trying to help them, and they will pull them down to their level. It's very, 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 very sad how that works. And it doesn't have to be to that extreme. That's just a very easy example. You can think about it from somebody in an office or a work environment. You just don't get along with them. They're just kind of negative. They just haven't grasped the concepts of the job. And maybe you're in a position of leadership, or you're just trying to be a good teammate, and you're trying to look after them. You're trying to coach them. You're trying to do the right thing. But if they're not ready to get on board, if they're not willing to help themselves and be a part of the team, then you got to let them go. And you got to have faith that, they're either going to find it on their own, or they're just going to find somewhere else to work. Because a lot of people, they're going to sacrifice themselves for their own career development. And so on the extreme end of people who are hyper successful, you say that there's a lot of psychopathic and sociopathic A-type personalities. And that's because mainly they just didn't really give a shit about those people. They kind of just let it be. They wrote them off as somebody who is not going to progress, and they kind of just focused on themselves. So it doesn't have to be that extreme, but it's a dog eat dog world, and that's the truth. All right. So I think it'll be interesting for the next chapter. There's not a whole lot of content to talk about in this one. Yeah, so take it easy.